Imagine walking down a quiet hallway in a sprawling, meticulously clean, seemingly perfect family home. You glance at the children's bedrooms, expecting to see typical suburban life, but your blood runs completely cold. You notice the heavy metal locks on the doors. And they aren't installed on the inside for privacy. They're installed on the outside of the doors, effectively turning those children's bedrooms into domestic holding cells. You absolutely have to stick around until the end of this investigation to hear the unbelievable resolution to this nightmare.
We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Wild Crime Podcasts. We are officially done with boring, slow-burn true crime. We're tearing into the most baffling cases on Earth, untangling the lies, and dropping you right in the middle of the madness.
Whether you're on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we are here to walk you through the mystery and make your next hour incredibly thrilling.
So today we are examining the March 2026 arrests of Joseph and Kendra Duggar. It's just a terrifying timeline of multi-generational cover-ups, institutional silence, and really the chilling reality behind this massive reality television empire.
Right, and we should lay out exactly what we're pulling from here.
Yeah, absolutely. We are referencing official arrest affidavits, Washington County Jail communications, court records, and verified public reporting. And obviously, we must remind everyone that all individuals discussed are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. We maintain an impartial, factual stance. We are not endorsing or, taking sides regarding any political factions or religious organizations mentioned, like the Institute and Basic Left Principles or the Family Research Council. We are just following the documented evidence.
And man, that documented evidence is staggering because we're analyzing a system of suppression that has literally operated in plain sight for decades. But the facade finally suffered this catastrophic fracture on Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. So let's start right there. Give us the scene. What exactly goes down on that Wednesday?
Right. So on that specific Wednesday, Joseph Duggar, who is 31 years old, is arrested down in Bay County, Florida. And the charge leveled against him is, it's not a minor infraction. It is a life felony in the state of Florida.
A life felony.
Yeah. Lewd and lascivious molestation of a child under 12, accompanied by an additional charge of lewd and lascivious conduct by a person 18 or older. Under Florida statutes, these are some of the most severe charges a person can possibly face. They carry immense, mandatory minimum sentences.
Okay, but I read the timeline in the source materials, and the sheer gap in time is what immediately threw me. Because this arrest happens in early 2026, but the alleged crime detailed in that arrest affidavit, it happened back during a family vacation to Panama City Beach in the summer of 2020.
Exactly.
A family beach vacation. And the victim was only 9 years old at the time. She's now 14. So we are talking about roughly 6 years of total unbroken silence.
6 years?
6 years, where this child is carrying this horrific trauma while the family continues to, smile for cameras, post on Instagram, and project this image of fundamentalist purity to the whole world. How does a secret of that magnitude stay buried in a family with that much public scrutiny?
Well, it requires a highly controlled, tightly insulated environment. Like, for a crime to stay hidden for over half a decade within a prominent family, you aren't just dealing with a single lie. You're dealing with a functioning architecture of suppression.
Right. It takes a village to hide something this big.
Exactly. But eventually, the psychological weight just becomes too much, and the silence breaks. So the victim, now 14 years old, finally disclosed the abuse. And the moment that disclosure occurred, it triggered a forensic progression that moved with incredible velocity.
Because the parents didn't hesitate.
They didn't. According to the Bay County arrest affidavit, the victim's father did not wait around. He directly confronted Joseph Duggar about the allegations. And during that initial face-to-face confrontation, Joseph actually admitted to the abuse.
Which is astonishing on its own, because most perpetrators facing a life felony deny it or deflect or demand a lawyer immediately. They don't just say, yeah, I did it. But the progression doesn't stop with that first confrontation, does it?
It does not. The situation escalated really rapidly. Detectives in Town, Arkansas, which is the small town where the Duggars reside, became involved, and they arranged what is known as a monitored phone call.
Okay, so the cops are listening in.
Yes. The victim's father called Joseph back, but this time sworn law enforcement officers were actively listening to and recording the conversation, and on that recorded line, Joseph admitted to the conduct a second time.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he provided law enforcement with 2 documented confessions before he even bothered to retain legal counsel.
Hold on, we have to pause here. Because what on earth was going through his head? He has already been confronted by the father. He knows he is on the radar. He has to know the walls are closing in at this point.
You would think so.
If you are 31 years old and someone calls you to discuss a felony you committed against a child, how do you just confess on an open phone line? It's not just arrogance. It's like a complete fundamental detachment from how the actual legal system operates.
You are touching on the exact psychological mechanism at play here, actually. Because to understand why he confessed so readily, we have to examine the specific wording he used with the police. It is incredibly revealing. He didn't offer a standard factual confession. He didn't use legal terminology at all.
Right, he used that one phrase.
Yes. According to the affidavit, he told a detective that his, quote, intentions were not pure.
Intentions were not pure. I read that phrase, and I swear I had to read it 3 more times just to make sure my eyes were working. Because he is talking about a life felony against a 9-year-old child, and he phrases it like he accidentally had a bad thought during a church sermon.
Yeah, or like he stole a cookie and feels bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is pure hubris. It is hubris masking itself as religious piety.
Well, it's a textbook example of linguistic deflection, which is heavily rooted in his fundamentalist upbringing. He is actively framing a horrific, real-world felony offense as a mere spiritual misstep. By calling it an issue of impure intentions, he is attempting to sanitize predatory behavior through the vocabulary of his religious environment.
Right, he's trying to control the narrative with church words.
Exactly. He is not acting like a criminal caught dead to rights by the state. He is acting like a congregant offering a vague confession to a sympathetic pastor. It exposes a fatal flaw in his understanding of jurisdiction. He genuinely believes his own family's internal spin.
Which is what, exactly?
The idea that accountability is strictly a theological concept, managed in-house, rather than a legal one managed by the criminal justice system.
He honestly thought he could just spiritualize his way out of handcuffs. He literally thought the internal vocabulary of his insular, highly controlled religious world would work on a sworn detective whose entire job is to put predators in prison.
Yep.
It shows a level of delusion that is almost hard to process.
Yeah.
He views himself as completely immune to secular law.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. What goes through your mind when you hear a grown man blame his intentions for a horrific crime against a 9-year-old? Because the disconnect is just jarring.
It is entirely jarring. But honestly, that confession alone is wild. But it completely pales in comparison to what they found hidden inside the actual house.
Right, because the pace of the investigation accelerated tremendously after that. By 3:15 in the afternoon, just a few days after the initial arrest, Tawnytown detectives are walking through Joseph and Kendra Duggar's home to execute a search warrant.
Which is standard procedure, right?
Usually, yes. Typically, in a case like this, detectives are looking for digital devices, hidden hard drives, journals, any physical evidence related to the charges. But what they found physically altered the entire scope of the investigation.
So they are walking through a seemingly normal suburban Arkansas home. You can imagine the scene, right? Toys on the floor, family photos on the walls, the illusion of a happy, normal life. And then they get to the children's bedrooms. There are 4 children living in this home, ranging in age from 3 to 7 years old. And the police find heavy deadbolt locks installed on the bedroom doors.
Which is strange,
But not on the inside. The locks are installed on the outside of the doors.
The environmental evidence here is chilling, and it speaks volumes about the daily reality inside that home. From an architectural and legal standpoint, an exterior lock on a bedroom door has only one functional purpose: to prevent the person inside the room from leaving without the explicit permission of the person on the outside.
It transforms a child's bedroom, a place that should be a safe sanctuary, into a literal domestic detention center.
And the immediate legal fallout from this discovery was severe and swift. Kendra Duggar, who is 27 years old, was arrested on March 22nd, 2026, in Washington County, Arkansas. She was hit with 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor and 4 counts of second-degree false imprisonment.
Wait, stop right there. Second-degree false imprisonment. That is an incredibly heavy charge for a mother of 4 young kids. How does the law even define that in this context?
Well, in Arkansas, false imprisonment in the second degree occurs when a person knowingly and without lawful authority restrains another person so as to interfere substantially with their liberty.
Okay, so by placing exterior locks on the doors of children aged 3 to 7, The state is arguing that she stripped them of their fundamental liberty.
Exactly, and created a profoundly dangerous environment. I mean, think about the fire hazard alone. If a fire breaks out in the hallway at midnight, those children are entirely trapped in those rooms. They physically cannot escape.
You know, I am having major déjà vu discussing this. When I saw the detail about the exterior locks in the notes, an alarm bell went off in my head. Didn't his parents, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, do this exact same thing decades ago?
They did, and that connection is precisely what elevates this case from a single disturbing household incident to a multi-generational crisis of institutionalized abuse. Decades earlier, when the abuse perpetrated by their eldest son, Josh Duggar, was first revealed to the family, Jim Bob and Michelle reportedly used this exact same exterior lock strategy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, they installed locks on the outside of the girls' bedroom doors to separate Josh from his sisters at night.
It is absolutely sickening because they didn't view locking children in rooms as a desperate, failed emergency measure from a dark period in their past. They codified it. They normalized it as a standard parenting technique. They literally passed down the architectural blueprint for building a cell to the next generation.
They did.
And now you have Kendra, a 27-year-old mother, staring down 8 serious misdemeanor charges, and her 4 young children have been removed from the home by the state.
To understand how a 27-year-old mother reaches a point where she is literally locking her toddlers in their rooms from the outside, we have to explore the intense psychology of Kendra's position. If we analyze her dual state of mind, which is heavily documented in her recorded jailhouse phone calls, you hear a woman whose psyche is completely fractured.
How so?
Well, on one hand, she is crying, telling Joseph that her children are her absolute priority, sobbing that losing them to the state is the hardest part of this ordeal. But simultaneously, in the very same breath, she assures Joseph that, quote, everyone still loves him.
It is a profound, almost paralyzing level of cognitive dissonance. But look at her background. She married Joseph when she was just 19 years old. She was raised and conditioned her entire life by the teachings of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, the IBLP. Her entire identity, her entire worldview has been built on the concept of absolute submission to male authority. She was taught never to question her father, and then never to question her husband. Now she is sitting in a county jail cell. Her children have been seized by the state. Her husband is facing 25 years to life in a Florida prison, and yet her core programming is still telling her to comfort the accused man.
The IBLP doctrine hinges on a concept known as the umbrella of authority. It teaches that God provides a literal umbrella of protection over a family. The husband is directly under God, the wife is under the husband, and the children are under the wife.
Right, a strict hierarchy.
Exactly. And the teaching explicitly warns that if a wife steps out from under her husband's authority, even if he is acting unlawfully, she removes herself from God's protection and opens herself up to spiritual attack. For Kendra, turning against Joseph isn't just a legal decision. In her mind, it is a spiritual death sentence.
But based on the jailhouse calls we have, that programming is finally starting to glitch, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sheer weight of the legal system is forcing a crack in that umbrella.
It is. The pressure is causing the facade to fracture. Because while she is offering him comfort and telling him everyone loves him, she also informs him on a recorded call that she has retained her own independent attorney. And crucially, she explicitly warns Joseph not to trust anyone.
That is a massive blinking red flag for the internal family dynamic, because the unified, impenetrable front the family usually projects is cracking. She is terrified. Her maternal instincts are going to war against her lifelong religious conditioning. She is slowly starting to realize that the Duggar family machine's ultimate priority is protecting the family name and protecting the patriarch, not protecting her or her 4 children. She's realizing she might just be collateral damage.
We'll get to the psychological fallout of her breaking that conditioning in a second, but first, you have to hear the absolutely twisted emails his family sent him while he sat in solitary confinement.
If the exterior locks on the toddler's doors were the darkest physical evidence in this case, the jailhouse communications are absolutely the darkest psychological evidence.
Oh.
Thanks to public records releases from the Washington County Detention Center, we have the receipts. We have a literal transcript of exactly how this family operates when they think the cameras are off and the public isn't watching.
Yeah, the logistics of their internal cover-up are morbidly fascinating. We have to look at the emails sent by Anna Duggar. Anna is the wife of Josh Duggar, the eldest brother who is currently serving 12.5 years in a federal penitentiary for receiving and possessing child sexual abuse material.
Right.
Anna sends Joseph an email while he is in holding, and the tone of this email is completely surreal.
Surreal doesn't even begin to cover it. Anna's acting like a seasoned concierge for the penal system.
She really is.
She's giving him practical tips on commissary timing, breaking down exactly how much the phone calls cost per minute, explaining the technical process for setting up video visits, and casually warning him that the prosecutors actively monitor all the jailhouse communications.
It's bizarre.
She is literally passing down an inmate survival guide because her own husband just went through the exact same system. The fact that a family has a designated expert on federal and state incarceration protocols is mind-boggling. It is so normalized for them.
The normalization of severe criminal proceedings is a key behavioral indicator of a deeply dysfunctional system. Anna praises Kendra's strength, quotes various scriptures, and manages the mundane logistics of his incarceration without a single flinch of horror regarding the actual charges. But the most disturbing behavior in these communications comes from Joseph himself.
Oh man, this part.
While he is sitting in a solitary confinement cell, he decides to rename his cell. He calls it his, quote, prayer closet.
A prayer closet. He is locked in a concrete cage because he allegedly committed a life felony against a 9-year-old child. And he is pretending he is on a spiritual retreat. He is actively romanticizing his own incarceration.
He tells his family via email that he has read the entire book of Psalms. He then mentions that he is reading a religious devotional about, quote, boundary failures in Exodus, and casually refers to the text as fascinating.
I cannot handle the grotesque irony of that statement. The man is sitting in a jail cell for committing the ultimate, most horrific boundary failure imaginable against a vulnerable child, and he is treating a devotional on boundaries like it is an interesting little academic puzzle. He's completely detached from reality.
If we pause the timeline to profile the narcissism at work here, it is profound and deeply unsettling. Joseph explicitly compares his situation to the biblical figure of Joseph, a man who, according to Scripture, was falsely imprisoned, endured hardship, and was eventually vindicated and raised to a position of power. Joseph Duggar is entirely detached from the reality of his own recorded confessions. This isn't just standard legal denial. It is weaponized arrogance. He views himself as the protagonist in a spiritual test, the victim of a secular world that just doesn't understand him, rather than a predator facing justice for his own actions. He is taking a Florida life felony and filtering it entirely through the lens of a religious persecution complex.
And here's the sickest, most infuriating part of this entire communication log. I read through the summaries of these jailhouse emails and phone calls multiple times just to make sure I was missing a page. Across every single email, across every single recorded phone call between Joseph, Anna, Kendra, and Jim Bob, not one single person mentions the 9-year-old victim.
Not once.
Not a prayer for her, not a moment of guilt, not a shred of empathy. The child is entirely systematically erased from their shared reality.
That erasure is the ultimate function of their internal fundamentalist system. The system is meticulously designed to absorb the crisis, swarm the accused with comfort and resources, and completely erase the victim from the narrative. The victim becomes a mere inconvenience to the family's image. And nowhere is that mechanism clearer than in the email sent by the patriarch himself, Jim Bob Duggar.
That email is a masterclass in manipulation and deflection.
Jim Bob writes to Joseph and briefly acknowledges that Joseph made, quote, terrible decisions. But he immediately pivots away from accountability. He compares Joseph to King David, a biblical figure who committed grievous sins but remained favored by God.
Unbelievable.
He tells his son that God isn't finished with his life, heavily implying that this felony incarceration is merely a temporary detour on his grand path to redemption. And perhaps most shockingly, he dismisses Kendra's arrest entirely. He refers to the charges against her, the charges for locking her young children in their rooms, as ridiculous.
Ridiculous. That is his chosen word for the act of bolting heavy deadlocks on the outside of the 3-year-old's bedroom door. The sheer audacity to call state intervention ridiculous when children are in imminent danger shows how deeply he resents any authority outside of his own. This is the exact same playbook he used 20 years ago. Protect the accused son, erase the victim, and blame the secular world for overreacting to a family matter. It is a sick cycle of enabling.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. How is it possible that an entire family can generate hours of calls and emails and completely erase the victim from their conversations? It requires a massive collective psychological effort to maintain that level of denial. They are literally discussing commissary snacks and Bible verses while a 14-year-old girl is dealing with the devastating, life-altering trauma of what happened to her at age 9. They have built a psychological fortress where the truth simply cannot penetrate.
That level of delusion is infuriating to witness, but it makes complete, terrifying sense once you trace the toxic roots of this family back to the year 2002. We're about to show you exactly how Jim Bob got away with this the first time.
Right, because the architecture of the 2026 collapse is built directly on the foundational blueprint of silence established in March 2002. That was the year Jim Bob first learned that his teenage son, Josh, had been sexually harming his own sisters. Faced with that horrific reality, Jim Bob had a legal and moral obligation to pick up the phone and call Child Protective Services or the local police.
But he didn't.
Instead, he made a calculated, deliberate decision. He went to the church elders.
He kept it entirely in-house. He used the fundamentalist church structure as a shield to bypass the legal justice system. And the church elders didn't call the police either. Instead, they sent Josh to a labor program, manual labor. They didn't send him to a licensed psychological professional. They didn't send him to a juvenile detention center. They sent him to do chores. They treated serial abuse like it was a behavioral quirk that could just be sweat out through hard work.
And that enforced silence held for over a year. It wasn't until July 2003 that Jim Bob finally decided to take Josh to law enforcement. But he didn't just walk into a random police precinct and file a standard report. He took Josh to a personal friend who worked as an Arkansas state trooper.
This is where the institutional rot becomes absolutely undeniable. Let's break down how mandatory reporter laws actually work. Under Arkansas law, a police officer is a mandated reporter. If they hear even a suspicion of child sexual abuse, they do not have discretion. They are legally required to log the report and immediately contact the child abuse hotline.
Yes, that's the law.
But this specific trooper, he gives Josh a stern talking to, files absolutely zero paperwork, logs nothing into the state system, and buries the entire incident.
The administrative mechanics of that failure are crucial. Because the trooper filed no official report, there was no paper trail for Child Protective Services to follow. The system was utterly blind to the danger. And the grim irony of that specific institutional failure is that the officer who buried the Duggar report in 2003 is currently serving 56 years in federal prison on completely unrelated, severe criminal charges involving child exploitation.
Wow.
The Duggars were operating within a nexus of corrupted, compromised authority, and because that officer filed nothing, the statute of limitations clock in Arkansas started ticking down. By the time the police formally investigated the abuse in December 2006, which only happened because an anonymous individual sent a tip to Oprah Winfrey's production company, the 3-year statute of limitations for the crimes had already expired.
They successfully ran out the clock. Jim Bob orchestrated a cover-up so effective, utilizing his connections and the church's shadow justice system, that the actual legal system couldn't touch them by the time the truth leaked. And what did this family do while they were sitting on this massive, horrific secret? They didn't retreat in shame. They built a multi-million-dollar television empire.
The timing is incredible and deeply cynical. They parlayed their heavily curated fundamentalist image into a TLC reality show, which eventually became 19 Kids and Counting, premiering just a few years after the police investigation hit a dead end. They built a massive, lucrative brand, generated millions of dollars, and leveraged their fame to gain immense political influence.
Right.
They even had Josh, the very son whose crimes they had concealed, working in Washington, D.C. as a prominent lobbyist for the Family Research Council, advocating for conservative family values on a national stage. They used political power and media ubiquity as a forensic shield.
It is the ultimate, most devastating grift. They are selling a brand of wholesome, untouchable purity to millions of Americans, all while sitting on a ticking time bomb. And that bomb only truly detonates in 2021 when Josh is arrested by federal authorities. And we are not talking about a minor technical charge. He is convicted of receiving and possessing child sexual abuse material involving infants. Material depicting children as young as 18 months old.
The 2021 federal trial of Josh Duggar was a watershed moment because it finally forced Jim Bob Duggar to face a secular authority he could not control. During a pretrial hearing, Jim Bob was forced to take the stand under oath. When federal prosecutors grilled him about the specific details of what he knew back in 2002, Jim Bob repeatedly testified that he, quote, couldn't remember the specifics.
Oh, how convenient.
Yeah, he suffered a highly convenient selective lapse in memory regarding the most traumatic event in his family's history.
But the federal judge saw right through it. Judge Timothy Brooks literally wrote in an official permanent court finding that Jim Bob Duggar was not credible. He cited Jim Bob's evasiveness and his obvious desperate reluctance to testify against his son. A federal judge put it in writing that the patriarch of this moral empire was effectively lying under oath.
Yet, despite that damning judicial finding, there were zero legal consequences for Jim Bob. The federal system convicted Josh and sentenced him to over a decade in prison, but it let the architect of the two-decade cover-up walk away untouched. Jim Bob returned to his compound in Arkansas, seemingly untouchable, but the cover-up goes even deeper than Jim Bob's actions in 2002.
Wait, it goes deeper.
Yes. If we examine the bombshell revelations from Amy Duggar King's 2025 memoir titled Holy Disruptor, we see that the deviance and the mechanisms of silence go back another entire generation. Amy reveals that Jimmy Lee Duggar, Jim Bob's father, was identified within the family as a severe credible danger to children.
Her own grandfather. Amy wrote in vivid detail that she was strictly forbidden from ever being alone with them. Her mother, Deanna, and her grandmother would literally lock doors at night to keep him away from her. And according to Amy's account, Jim Bob allegedly knew all about his father's violent and predatory nature. He was allegedly present during incidents of severe domestic violence.
This historical context completely changes the paradigm of the Duggar story. This is not a case of one bad son in Josh or a second isolated bad son in Joseph. It is a documented three-generation cycle of deviance, violence, and predation, fiercely protected and insulated by a rigid theological structure.
Yeah.
The teachings of Bill Gothard and the IBLP demand absolute submission to the patriarch, regardless of his flaws, and explicitly frame any exposure of family sins to the outside secular world as a spiritual betrayal of the highest order. That specific doctrine is the glue that held the silence together across three generations. It weaponized faith to protect abusers.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. Would you have noticed these red flags? Or does a wholesome TV image completely blind society to the truth? Millions of people watched this family on television for over a decade and genuinely thought they were the ultimate picture of American morality. The camera crews were inside their house for years, and nobody saw the deadbolts on the outside of the doors. Nobody saw the trauma hiding behind the forced smiles.
The history is dark, but what is happening right now in 2026 is tearing the family in half. And there is one family caught in the crossfire whose story is going completely ignored.
We absolutely have to pivot and look at the unspoken victims in this current legal mess, the Caldwell family. These are Kendra's parents. Paul Caldwell is a Baptist pastor. He's the man who literally stood at the altar and officiated Joseph and Kendra's wedding. He welcomed Joseph into his family. And right now, the Caldwells are experiencing a total, devastating freefall. They are actively crowdfunding on GoFundMe, begging the public for money to cover emergency legal representation and basic housing.
The circumstantial mystery surrounding the Caldwell family's sudden collapse is fascinating. And it requires connecting some very specific, verified data points from the public record. We know from the arrest affidavit that the alleged abuse occurred during a summer 2020 family vacation to Panama City Beach. We also know from public social media posts from that time that the Caldwell family was on that exact same trip with the Duggars.
Right.
Furthermore, the Caldwells have younger children in their family who fit the exact age range of the victim described in the police reports.
Right, and we know from the forensics timeline that the victim's father was the one who confronted Joseph directly in Taneytown. Both the Duggar and Caldwell families live in that exact same small town. The proximity is undeniable.
Now, we must be explicitly clear here regarding the facts. No credible media outlet or law enforcement agency has officially confirmed the identity of the victim's father or explicitly named the Caldwells as the victims in this case. The records remain sealed to protect the minor, but the circumstantial pattern is overwhelming.
It really is.
The shared vacation timeline, the ages of the children, the physical proximity. And then there is a massive real estate anomaly that occurred just before the arrests. Months before Joseph's arrest made international headlines, the Caldwells quietly deeded the home they were living in back over to Joseph and Kendra. The home had previously been transferred to them, but they suddenly gave it back and moved out. From a monitored jail phone call, Kendra actually confirmed the timeline of her family's sudden move.
Wait, so the in-laws are losing their home, moving out abruptly, and begging the public for legal fees and housing money on a crowdfunding site, while Jim Bob Duggar is strolling into a Florida courtroom ready to stroke a check for a $600,000 bond without breaking a sweat. The disparity in power and resources is nauseating. The accused predator gets a blank check and a team of high-powered defense attorneys, and the people potentially caught in the blast radius, the people who may have been victimized, are crowdsourcing their basic survival.
It perfectly highlights the extreme financial leverage and control the Duggar patriarch holds over his extended network. If you remain inside his protective bubble and play by his rules, you get a $600,000 bond. If you fall outside of it, or if you challenge the system, you lose your housing and your financial security instantly. But despite that financial power, the active legal jeopardy facing the family is monumental.
Yeah, they're in real trouble.
Joseph is facing a staggering reality in Florida. A life felony conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 25 years. He is 31 years old. If convicted, that is effectively a life sentence. He would be well into his 50s before even seeing a parole board. Meanwhile, Kendra is facing late April court dates in Arkansas for the exterior locks, defending against 8 misdemeanor counts that could result in the permanent termination of her parental rights.
It is a dual jurisdiction nightmare for the family. They are fighting a massive legal war on 2 completely separate fronts, separated by state lines, dealing with 2 entirely different sets of severe charges that both ultimately point back to a fundamentally broken, abusive household. The reality TV facade is dead.
It's completely gone.
Yeah.
And the ticking clock of justice isn't just counting down for Joseph and Kendra. The most significant looming legal question remaining in this entire saga is Jim Bob's own exposure to criminal charges.
Right.
During the Josh era in the early 2000s, Jim Bob managed to stall until the statute of limitations expired before investigators could act. But Joseph's 2026 case operates under a completely different legal mechanism. Arkansas mandatory reporting laws require any adult who suspects child abuse to report it immediately. And crucially, the statute of limitations for the crime of failure to report does not run from the date the abuse occurred. It runs from the date of knowledge.
Wait, pause right there. Run from the date of knowledge. So the clock doesn't start when the crime happens in 2020. It starts the moment a jury believes Jim Bob found out about it. If the police start executing search warrants on their phones, pulling their iCloud backups, and digging through years of emails.
Exactly. Investigators today possess modern subpoena power over digital communications that just didn't exist in 2002. They can pull server timestamps, text metadata, location data. If law enforcement uncovers a single text message, a single forwarded email, or secures a witness statement proving that Jim Bob Duggar knew about the 2020 Panama City Beach incident before the 14-year-old's forensic interview in 2026, the failure to report clock may still be actively ticking.
Wow.
He could finally face direct criminal charges for the exact same cover-up strategy he has relied on for his entire life. Furthermore, Arkansas's civil litigation landscape has evolved significantly. The heavily documented history of his negligence in the Josh case could easily become the evidentiary foundation for a massive, sweeping civil lawsuit against him right now.
Man, the family members who have managed to escape the cult-like environment, like Amy Duggar King and Jim Bob's own sister Deanna, they are no longer keeping the secrets. They are openly speaking out to the media. Amy is publicly calling the family a toxic system. Deanna is publicly advising Kendra to get a divorce and flee. The ones who are free from the financial control are screaming the truths from the rooftops, while the ones still trapped inside the compound are hiding behind PR spokespeople and misusing scripture to justify the unjustifiable.
Think about the sheer terrifying scale of the IBLP organization and its teachings. The Duggars were just the famous, televised version of this system. If a family with camera crews inside their home for a decade could manage to build physical holding cells out of their toddlers' bedrooms and successfully hide serial abuse across 3 generations, ask yourself what is happening right now in the thousands of homes following this exact same doctrine completely off the grid, without any cameras watching.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this frequently, bringing you the most fascinating cases in the most interesting way possible. Lock in, because you do not want to miss the crazy mysteries we've queued up for next time. See you then.